Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another AMP Impact release webinar. We're really excited to be sharing the Gemini release with you. I'm joined today by Gabby, our product manager, and it's great to see a great turnout from around the AMP universe here. So we're excited to dig into our latest release with you all. This is our third release of the year and our 15th release of AMP Impact since the product was launched. I'm just trying to man the waiting room here and accept everybody who's coming on in. So what we'll cover today, we'll take a quick zoom out and look at the feature overview as we do with each release webinar. We will take a look at some of the highlights from the Gemini release. Gabby will be running us through a demo of the latest features and enhancements in the Gemini release. And we'll have some time for Q&A. We may be able to let you guys out a little early today, depending on how many questions people have. Feel free to ask questions as we're going along in the chat as they come up. We want to keep this interactive and make sure we're focusing our attention where we can be most helpful. So wonderful. So moving into our feature overview. So this is a diagram that we use to just keep track of and kind of visualize the focus of AMP Impact as a product and all of its major features and the subcomponents thereof. So I'll just kind of run you through. This gives you a bit of a sense of the innovation that we've been driving this year with the Fornax release and now the Gemini release, as well as some of the priorities and items that we're working on for 2022. So in the Fornax release, which you can see here in orange, you can see we released some new functionality around fund management. We introduced functionality in the implementation planning or work planning part of AMP Impact for tracking milestones and the ability to download and upload work plans with Excel using an Excel template. We gave a little bit of a facelift to the risk management functionality and brought in some new risk stoplights, scoring, and automatic level setting for risks. We also built in a screen flow for auto scheduling reporting periods, so that you can more quickly get reporting periods set up for your monthly, quarterly, annually cadence of reporting periods. We did some improvements to submissions or the narrative assessment functionality on the right side here for pagination. We also introduced a new functionality that we call impact stories, where you can capture qualitative data in a story structure connected to reporting periods or projects or thematic areas or geographic areas or all of the above. And then in Fornax, we also released some Power BI dashboard templates. In the Gemini release, that's the release that we just launched. We have two major new features here. So the ability to copy objectives from other frameworks, which we'll show you what we mean by that. Really excited about that functionality. And then skip logic in submissions or conditional visibility, conditional display of questions and sections. So you can hide or display questions based on the answers to other questions in a submission template. For 2022, we are working on quite a lot of stuff. So we're in the advanced stages of designing functionality for moving our targets and results pages onto Lightning Web Components. As well as introducing some new data types and some additional functionality on those pages for handling read-only indicators, capturing results as not applicable, handling pick list indicators. And then one thing that I think will be really, really key in 2022 is we're redesigning the targets page in a what we're calling kind of single entry view. So you can set targets across all reporting periods in one screen instead of having to go through each reporting period as you're setting targets for a project or a grant or a program. We're also looking to later in the year revamp the Excel download template for financials to make that a bit friendlier and more sophisticated. And then we're also looking at where we can drive value with downloading documents from AMP Impact beyond the Excels and Word downloads that you're able to do right now. So we may be reaching out to you to get some input and bounce some ideas around with you as we're moving toward the design work on that feature. We're also planning to get a Tableau dashboard starter out in 2022 as well to complement the Power BI dashboard starter that's out. Small enhancement to the IATI publishing functionality in this Gemini release. We haven't kind of called it out as it wasn't a big overhaul there, but it's also something that we're looking at for 2022 and as we have some demand for expanding the use of that feature to make that a bit friendlier as well. So I'll talk through just some of the highlights from the Gemini release with some of these animations. So the first one is the ability to copy objectives and indicators from another framework. So you can see here, if you search for a project from a framework, you can grab another project and then select the framework that you want to copy from. So a project could have one or more frameworks. Then you can select the objectives, so the outcomes, impacts, outputs from that framework. You could bring the whole framework in if you wanted to, or you could select specific items. It'll bring those items in using keeping their hierarchy intact. And Gabby will show this. You can also copy the indicators and the indicator relationships to the items in the framework as well. So this can save a massive amount of time as you're building frameworks, especially if you're an organization that has frameworks that are constructed not only of custom outputs and outcomes, but if you're trying to drive sort of corporate alignment or organizational alignment around a corporate strategic framework or results framework or regional frameworks, thematic frameworks, or otherwise. So this is a requirement we've seen come up with a number of different organizations. The other big piece for Gemini is the, as I mentioned, skip logic in submissions. So you can see how you configure this in a template here on the left. So you can set up criteria for which a question or a section should be displayed so that it will only get displayed if those criteria are met. So the example that you can see here is, based on another pick list in the submission, we can set this question here to only show up if that pick list is set to 5 to 10 or more than 10. So if you had one of the other values in the pick list, then this question would be hidden. But Gabby will show how that looks in real life pretty soon. A couple of their smaller pieces in Gemini. So we added in some design flexibility. So in the framework's Lightning Web component, there's a new design attribute where you can hide the indicator columns. So we're finding that there's most organizations that are using frameworks are also using indicators. There's a couple of organizations using frameworks that either aren't using indicators or in certain contexts, we want the users to really just focus on the framework and not so much on the indicators. And so the ability to hide indicator columns gives you a bit more real estate for the descriptions in your framework objectives or your framework items, so that you can use that full real estate of the page to really focus the user on the framework and whatever fields or attributes for the framework items that you want to display. Similarly, we heard some feedback around the catalog objective pop-up. So this was a new feature from earlier in the year where you can add new objectives. You can add objectives to a framework from a catalog of standard objectives. And we got some feedback just that the pop-up was a bit short. And so we've just expanded the height of that to give a little bit more space for being able to see the objectives and the hierarchy within them from the catalog. Another design attribute that we added, this one for the activities LWC or the Gantt chart functionality in AMP Impact. So you can override the default sort order for the table. So basically what this will allow you to do is if you want to sort your Gantt chart in a particular way, you can do that. So by default in AMP Impact, the Gantt chart sorts on the earliest start date of the activities. And so you're seeing kind of a Gantt chart that shows progression from the earliest activities to the latest activities, which is a helpful way of looking at the Gantt chart, but it's one way of looking at the Gantt chart. What we're seeing more and more organizations using naming conventions for activities or classifications for activities where we want that to be driving the sort logic. And so what you have now in this design attribute, which is called table sort fields, is the ability to set the default sort order for the table. So in this example, it would sort by name first, and then by the type of activity. And so that can just organize it a little bit differently for your users, so they can kind of visualize the activities when the page first loads up, visualize them in the way that makes the most sense for your organization. And then another fairly small bit just on targets and results is the ability to control the round off digits for really large numbers. So this is particularly important for numbers over 1 million. AMP was kind of rounding previously based on the number of decimals, which might not have always been appropriate. You could round to just show 1 million in the context of this number here if it was 1.45 million. So this provides a custom setting where you can control how many round off digits should be displayed after the number of millions in this case. And so that just allows you to, particularly if you're looking at really large numbers, whether those are large numbers of beneficiaries or cases or revenue numbers or expense numbers, can be really helpful in terms of how that gets visualized on the screen. So I think the next bit is to move into the demo. I'm seeing a couple chats coming through, so I just want to make sure. Oh, enlarge the screen. Cool. Yeah. So Gabby will do a demo, and that'll help you see things a little bit better. And I know the feature inventory slide can be a little small because there's so many features in there. But happy to answer any specific questions. We can pull it back up if we need to at the end. Great. Gabby, do we have you on the call?
Yes, we do. I am here.
Wonderful. Well, I'll stop sharing and I'll pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. All right, let me share my screen. And all right, and I just want to double check since this was not zoomed in enough earlier. Is this visible? Do I need to zoom in further?
Looks good on my side, Gabby.
Okay, cool. Then let's get started. So I am going to first start with a feature that Zach started off with, which is the copying from another framework. So again, this is to really help accelerate the setup of a framework to make it a lot easier than adding individual frameworks. And also in the case of having standard frameworks within your organization, you can copy from that and use that as a starting point. So in this example, in this organization, they have a global framework that I can copy from. You can also copy from other projects or programs that have a framework. And so let's say if I was to copy this one, if this only has one framework, it will actually auto-populate in the framework here. In this case, however, I want to copy from a different project that has multiple frameworks. You can see this shows all the projects that are in your system. I'm going to narrow it down to this one. And then here I can see that there's multiple frameworks there, and I can make that selection based on which framework I think is useful or is relevant. So because this is a framework that's relevant to cultivating youth entrepreneurship, that's why I picked this project, and I'll pick the Kenya framework. Once I click next, I can see all of the objectives that are within that framework. And what's great about this is you can actually see them within the hierarchy. So if you have a particular way that that framework is set up that you want to replicate, you can visualize that here. I can automatically, all of the objectives within that framework are selected. I can choose to remove any if I don't think they're relevant. And I have this little tag at the bottom, which will let me know how many objectives within the framework I'm selecting. And you'll notice that if I unselect an objective that's higher in the hierarchy, then I'll also unselect the objectives that are lower in the hierarchy. Cool. Okay. And here I can also make the decision whether I want to copy the indicators that are related to these objectives. So if you aren't using indicators, you can skip this step. Or if the indicators are very specific to the project that you're copying from, you can also skip this step. In this case, I will click select so that when I click next, I can see all of the indicators that are available. And again, they are all automatically selected. I'm going to leave them all selected for this case, and I'm going to click save. And here you can see the entire framework is copied. So that really saved me a lot of time in setting up this framework. Now, if you have any kind of standard frameworks or global frameworks that you want to start off with, you can set up a framework basically in just 1 minute by using this functionality. So that is copying from another framework. The next functionality that I would like to demo to you is the submissions skip logic. So here I already have a submission. I'm in the submission template. I'm currently in the template builder. And I already have a bunch of questions added so that you didn't have to watch me type in a bunch or fill in a bunch of pop-ups. So I'm going to show you how to actually add in the skip logic. One thing to note is that the skip logic is right now only dependent on pick lists or multi-select pick lists. So, this will display. So you can select the display on this based on prior pick lists or multi-select pick lists in the form. So here I'm going to select conditionally display this question. Sorry, let me go back. So here I have 2 questions. One is your organization a member of the South Asia Nonprofit Alliance, and then a follow-up question, which is to provide your South Asia Nonprofit Alliance reference number, which clearly would only be relevant if someone answers yes to the previous question. So here I'm going to select the conditional display of this question. You can add multiple multiple criteria. So if you actually have multiple questions in the form that you want to use to define whether this following question displays, you can do that. In this case, I only have one question that I want to determine the display of the question. So I am clicking that is your organization a member of the South Asian Nonprofit Alliance. And here I can see what the pick list answers are, and I can click yes. Worth noting that I can add multiple answers here. In this case, it's not appropriate, so I'll only add the one. And then I can click save. One thing, you can also set conditional display at the section level. So here I have in this section a question that says, who are the stakeholders involved in the main activities? You can see there's different options here. I want to highlight the partner organization staff and third-party consultants because later in the form, we have an entire section that's called partnerships. And so this I only want to show if that particular question contained either of those two last options. So who are the stakeholders involved in the activities for this? So if someone responds either partner organization staff or third-party consultants, only then do I want to see the section display. So click save here. And all right, so I set up skip logic for at both the section level and at the question level. And you'll see there's a little tag that shows that this question or section will only is conditionally displayed. So if the criteria are met, only then will these show. All right, so what does this actually look like in action? Let me create a submission based off of this. All right. I'm adding these details. All right, I'm gonna skip the rest of this and just relate it to this project. We can save. All right, now let's look at what this actually looks like. All righty. So, all right, I'm going to skip down to the questions that have skip logic defined. So you can see I actually don't see the question about providing the reference number for the South Asian Nonprofit Alliance. If I actually respond to this, there we go. Then it displays right below. And now, so this way you can make it a little bit easier for, if you have a really long form, you can make it a little easier for folks who are filling this out to only see the questions that are relevant to them. Likewise, let me scroll down. So you can see here, I have the objectives and activities. I don't see that final section. So let's see what happens if I select this. And there now, because I selected partner organization staff, I can see the entire partnerships section that pops up. And likewise, if I remove this, then it's hidden again. So let me actually leave that here. Let me actually leave that empty. And then I'll show you, I haven't filled anything out, but I will show you what this looks like from the review side as well. So here you can see because the partnerships section wasn't filled out because it actually wasn't shown to the user, it will be a tag that says that it is skipped. And then I didn't skip the question that I added skip logic on, so it still does display. But if I had, if that wasn't displayed to the user, you would also see the skipped tag next to this question. Okay, so yep, that's skip logic. Pretty nifty. We're really excited to bring that to you all and to really enhance this functionality to make it a lot more usable. So now I'm going to jump into a couple of the design attributes that we have introduced. So I'm going to switch to a different project here, actually. So the first one I wanted to show you is on the frameworks page. This is the one to hide the indicator column. So in this case, you can see this organization isn't using indicators within their framework. So this is taking up a lot of space and it's really squishing up the data for the framework objectives. So the way to remove the framework columns are to go to your Lightning app builder. Because this is a design, because this is a Lightning web component, we've included this as a Lightning design attribute. So you can do all of this kind of setups directly in Lightning app builder itself. So for all of you admins out there, hopefully this makes your lives a little bit easier by centralizing some of the setup in one place. So I go to the frameworks tab and then I click on the component. and I can click hide indicator columns as true. Let's save it. You can see in the preview that it is that the columns are saving. All right, now it's saved. And the preview, you can see that the columns are hidden. What does this look like in full size? Cool. So you can see here now all of the objective columns are taking up all of the space on the table. So you can add a lot more data that's relevant to your framework objectives. You can see a lot of that just right here. So if you want to have more enriched data regarding your objectives, that's possible and more visually appealing now that we have this, this design attribute. Okay, and then the last thing that I'm going to show you is the design attribute on activities regarding the setting the default sort order for for activities within an implementation plan. All right, so here I have an implementation plan, and you can see there's actually this phasing of activities that is not ordering it correctly. So I actually see phase 2 before I see phase 1, because maybe the planning for phase 2 is actually starting before the planning for phase 1, which entirely possible. But because of the default sort order being the start date of the activity itself, I'm seeing it in this order, which maybe may not make sense for my organization. So because I want to see this actually in the order of the phasing that I have written into the names, I'm going to, again, the app builder. And then I'll go to the activities tab. And then I will click on the activities lightning web component. And so here you see there's nothing there. There's some instructions on how to fill this out. In this case, I want to order this primarily by name. But here you can see it's a little small, but you can see that I also have contact field, the contact field in the table. So if I wanted to also have a secondary level of sort to group perhaps by who is assigned that activity, I can do that. So now I'll click save. And now I will go back to the page. All right, load the components. And here we go. So now we see what I wanted, which was for phase 1 to come first before phase 2. It's worth noting that the sort order will occur at the level in which the activity sits in the hierarchy. So you'll see that I collapse these all. The top level activities are all sorted by name first, and then within this activity, all these sub activities are likewise sorted by name. So it will happen basically at the indent level within the implementation plan. All right, so that was the last piece that I wanted to demo to you all. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if any questions have come in. Oh, does not look like we're ready.
We have not had any questions coming up. But if anyone does have any questions from what we've demonstrated, feel free to pop them in the chat or pull yourself off mute. Here we go. Great. Gabby, question from Naomi on when will the update be launched?
So the update is already available. So whenever you want it, please do reach out to your Vera connection, and we will see when we can get that into your.
Hi, this is Shivani from Oak Foundation. I have a question.
Hey, Shivani, go ahead.
Hey. So I was wondering about the feature of copying objectives from one framework or project and so on and so forth. But how does it work with the grants that are already tagged? Do we need to retag them?
No, you don't. It won't affect existing frameworks. So it's a new button that becomes available on the framework's component, which you could hide the button also if it's not relevant for you. but it's most helpful when you're building a framework. So if you wanted to kind of start building a framework by incorporating items from another, from another framework, that's what would be most helpful. But if for existing framework, for frameworks that are already built out, for frameworks that are already built out, it's not going to affect those. You wouldn't necessarily need to use that button. One design pattern that we're already seeing that I think may be interesting for an admin point of view is that depending on either the status of the framework or criteria about the project that we're in, it could be, it may make sense to display the button in some cases, but not display it in other cases. And so that's something that actually you can do with Salesforce Lightning components. So you can add conditional visibility to the component to say, show the Lightning web component with the button, if these criteria are met, show it without the button if those criteria are met. The support team can help you with configuring that sort of use case if that's needed for Oak's context.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. Question from Martin. Would the activities in the activity plan be linking to project, or could we use it also for planning activities inside a team that wouldn't link to one specific project, but be related to multiple work streams inside the team? Cool. Gabby, do you get that one? Or do you want me to field that?
I'm just reading through it one more time. Okay.
I think go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Gabby, but we can use the activities functionality just on the implementation plan object. So if you were using projects for something else, or you had work plans that weren't in the context of a project or a program or a grant, you could set up a work plan and use the activities functionality on the work plan page without having that dependency on project. Is that right, Gabby?
Yes, I'm just checking if I have this demo friendly already, but that is how it works. And we have set this up both for implementation plans as well as for frameworks, so that it can be used outside of the context of our project. And yeah, so this is already available and can be set up that way.
One sort of follow-up thing that we're thinking about for next year, a requirement that's come up only in a couple cases so far, is that it would be helpful to be able to see the activities component across projects, across implementation plans. And that isn't something that you can do yet. So you can do it in the context of a project across the implementation plans for that project, or you can do it in the context of a single implementation plan. But one requirement we've heard that, Martin, you can kind of validate or invalidate this if it would be helpful or not, is that it could be helpful to be able to visualize that the Gantt chart and the activity table across many plans and many projects, and then kind of apply filters as you can in that page. So that's something we're thinking about for later in 2022. It's not on the short-term roadmap though.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a bit of both. What we see is that people tend to go to other solutions like Monday.com or something to visualize team efforts in activities. But well, if this would be possible to also include inside the tool we already use for the projects, then that would be great indeed.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, yeah, we're not, we're not trying to have AMP be like a full-fledged competitor to like Asana or Monday per se, but we are similar to how Submissions provides, really good functionality native to Salesforce. If you're already using AMP, it's great for, being able to handle forms, in different contexts. But it's not a full-fledged web form tool. You can think of the activities functionality similarly. It's really nice, especially in how connected it is to your framework, to your indicators, to projects, and other things. And we'll continue expanding the functionality in it. But yeah, there are some other tools on the market that are just these kind of point solutions for task management. So there may be use cases for integrating with those tools as well. But we will continue to build upon what we have with the work planning functionality, and are always keen to hear from folks in terms of where we can expand it and what would be most helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool, great questions, guys. Any other questions that we can dig into while we've got what looks to be a great group assembled?
Hi, Zach. Can I ask one more?
Of course, Shivani, please go for it.
So could you tell a bit more about the currency field? Is it a custom object you're already using and you're customized a bit more?
So did you say currency?
Currency, yeah. You mentioned about decimal places and rounding off, right?
Yeah, actually, sorry. Yeah, in the screenshot, it may have not told the whole story there. Gabby, feel free to expand on my answer here if you want. This is specifically in the context of indicators and targets and results. So I think an example that I gave was if you had revenue numbers or expense numbers being reported, basically any numbers where you're reporting into, you're reporting numbers that are, over 1 million. The way AMP Impact was handling those prior to this release was it would just round it to, it'd round it to the integer if you'd set up the number with 0 decimal places, which is usually, which would be common. And so now you've got flexibility to kind of determine the number of decimal is the wrong word here, but the number of digits that you want to show in this context. So the example being that you could show 1.45 million instead of it just showing 1 million. The way it worked before was it would show 1 million, but you could hover over it and it would show the full number. And we found that this is a lot friendlier for handling those large numbers.
Thank you. Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Hopefully that's clear. I know this is a kind of a complicated one to explain. Cool. Naomi's question: are there updates in the pipeline that would allow for a log frame to be uploaded via an Excel sheet and auto-populated in the database? Great question, Naomi. Gabby, do you want to field that one?
Yeah, sure. So this is definitely on our roadmap. It's not currently on our short-term roadmap, but it is something that we are considering. Yeah, so if you have any use cases around that you'd like to pass along to us, please do let us know. We're happy to discuss what your requirements are around that. And next question, if you make an export of those rounded numbers, will you get the actual number or the rounded number? Great question. Yeah, if you are downloading from the add results page, and let me actually share my screen so you can see what this looks like. Cool. Yeah, so here, I just entered in this number, so it's a very silly example, but if you have this display of 5.74 million as a rounded number, the actual number is 5,735,000. If I were to download this, I would get the actual number, would not get the rounded number. So in the Excel sheet that you have, you would see the true value. Cool. All right, any other questions?
Well, folks are coming up with questions. Gabby, if I can put you on the spot, what's one thing that you're excited about for 2022 with AMP Impact?
Oh gosh, the single entry target page. I think that's one of the most exciting things that has been sitting on our roadmap for quite some time. So I'm really excited to see that come to fruition. And also the new indicator types. I'm actually really excited about that as well. I think it's going to really help folks with setting up their metrics and tracking them, and also give people a new dimension, I guess, to work with.
Cool. Gerard, did you have a question? Maybe you just pulled off mute. Nope. Cool. But yeah, amen, Gabby. Definitely excited about those target and results enhancements. I think that's going to be super helpful. Also, I think we'll see some improvements to the page performance as well. Those are sort of the last vestiges of Visualforce in AMP Impact are the targets page and results page. Those were two of the very first features in the product, and we've been steadily replacing many of our older features with new Lightning Web Components to stay onto the latest and greatest technology from Salesforce. But those, for those of you using those pages, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of functionality in there. So it's taken some time to plan for that move over to Lightning Web Components, but also we're taking that opportunity to do a bit of redesign on targets. And I think that I'm really excited to share that in 2022 with everybody. The sort of new look for how targets work in AMP. Great, and yeah, thanks Katrina for sharing that link. You can, if you want to bookmark that page, by the way, the AMP updates page. Every time we do a release, obviously we'll share news of the release, but that page is where we're publishing all release documentation. So you can find Gemini. You can also find previous releases, but you'll also find future releases on that link as well. Cool. So Naomi asks, do you have a community for NGO users of Salesforce? So this is something that's, if I understand the question right, Salesforce.org has kind of an online community connected to Salesforce's online community of users. And there's a lot of groups set up in that community talking about specific topics that that would be helpful. What we've done to date really is convene AMP Impact customers in AMP Impact summits, and we'll stay tuned for that. We're planning one for early 2022, and we'll invite everybody to join that. That'll be virtual, like the last one. In terms of like an online forum for discussing best practices with AMP Impact specifically, we are actually working on a Salesforce experience for AMP Impact customers and Vera clients in general, and looking forward to launching that in early 2022 as well. So stay tuned on that front. Gabby, anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think you mostly covered it. We're really excited to launch this community, however, for collaboration, not just amongst you all, but also amongst us. We're really excited to hear, to be able to just connect with you directly, hear what your pain points are, see how we can solve them in the product. And also just hear how people are using the product, how people are using AMP, and what great learnings people have had.
If I'm remembering right, are we still planning to get like an idea exchange sort of functionality in there? Or is that for V2?
I think that's for V2. But yeah, we're definitely hoping to get that in soon.
Cool. I'm really excited about getting some crowdsourced ideas from the community. Cool. Shivani asks whether we use any UI apps like Squid or just native Salesforce for UI. So this is just an important aspect of our philosophy for AMP Impact, is that it is 100% native to Salesforce. We do use a few JavaScript frameworks. So for example, the activities page uses a JavaScript framework. The performance graphs page uses a charts framework. But we don't use any third-party apps per se. So there's no dependencies on when you license AMP Impact. There's no dependency on other apps other than the Salesforce platform. So as long as you've got Salesforce, you're able to use AMP Impact. You don't need to have any other additional apps. That said, you can use additional apps. You can use additional apps with AMP Impact. So if you're using, let's say, Conga Composer for document generation, you can feed AMP Impact data into Conga templates that users can download. Or if you're using Form Titan for web forms, you could collect data via Form Titan or Form Assembly or Form Stack forms, feed them into AMP Impact objects, and then manage that data in AMP Impact in your Salesforce system. So AMP plays nicely with third-party tools, but it doesn't depend on any third-party tools. Cool. And then Bernard asks about cross disaggregation specifically, whether we'll have options in the future for cross disaggregating by other groups. This is something we've been discussing at length, Bernard. Disaggregation in general, and kind of how we would go about extending. The data model for AMP is set up to be extendable with additional levels of disaggregation. it would require rebuilding the entire UI to be able to cross disaggregate by anything. And what we're hearing from customers by and large is that use cases where you're cross disaggregating by something and then disaggregating by something else, and where sex isn't one of those things, are rare. They're not, they are small proportion of the use cases for targets and results. They do show up though as use cases. For now, if you have you need more levels of disaggregation, the way to do it in AMP is just to create additional indicators. And I appreciate that that's, as an M&E person, I appreciate that that's not 100% satisfying, because an indicator should be an indicator. On the other hand, I think there's a little bit of slippery slope risk in this area, not just for the complexity of the page and trying to handle n number of columns and y number of rows. I mean, you could have this massive matrix, but just thinking about for the end user experience and what it would translate, what it looks like if you are asking users to fill in hundreds or thousands of cells in a page. What does that mean for page performance? What does that mean for the user experience? What other things do we need to be anticipating? So long term, we are still looking at allowing additional levels of disaggregation in AMP. Cross disaggregation by a custom group is something we have talked about, but it's not among our additional disaggregation features. It's not the top priority compared to adding the option for an additional level of disaggregation. But we also don't feel that we've designed ourselves out of it from the data model's point of view. We really need to rework the UI. So that was a little bit of a long answer, but Gabby, feel free to add to that if you have anything to add or correct.
Nope, I think you nailed it on that one. Yeah, something we're definitely exploring. Just a lot of things that we need to think through in terms of the redesign, rebuild, how much effort it's going to be from our team to rework all of our components, because it will affect quite a few things. But it is definitely something that we want to provide to you all in the future. We just want to make sure we get it right, both for the project and for you all.
Great stuff. Feel free to keep the questions coming. Also, feel free to hop off if you're, if you got other meetings to run to. We don't have other content. We just want to make ourselves available for any Q&A. Great questions so far, and certainly stay tuned for our updates in 2022. We are targeting, like each year, to get 3 releases out. As we shared, the big focus in the first part of the year is on that moving the targets and results pages to Lightning Web Components, and then introducing a bit of additional flexibility for indicators. So stay tuned on that. I know those are features that are used by not everybody, but I think certainly the majority of AMP customers. So excited to get those revamped. And yeah, I think we've got a lot of momentum right now, and we've seen a tremendous amount of growth this year. With AMP, we've got growth not just with customers, but also new Salesforce partners that are stepping up and learning AMP and looking to add AMP Impact implementation to their practice. So so I think a lot of growth ahead on that front in the next couple of years. Cool. And
question just came in. Yeah. Anyone have a good recommendation for survey data collection integration into AMP? I feel like this might be a fun question to crowdsource for anyone who's worked on that.
Yeah, this is a great group to ask it in. But this is also a great example of a question that we would want to bring into the community that we'll be launching in 2022. So yeah, if folks have any experience on this front or recommendations, I'm happy to kick off with a couple, and anyone can feel free to unmute and chime in here. So common tools that we see. So there's dozens and dozens of mobile data collection tools out in the ecosystem, and this has been, as somebody who was working on offline mobile data collection back in 2010 with Open Data Kit, it's been really interesting for me to kind of see the evolution in this space and the the proliferation of apps and solutions in this space. Broadly, I would say, if I could split all of them into two categories, I would say there's apps that are one-way data collection up into basically a glorified CSV file, which are appropriate for cross-sectional surveys, but they're often used for lots of other things. So those would be like your Cobos, your ODKs, Point Mapper, lots of other tools like that, where you're collecting data usually offline, saving it. Whenever you get online, you're loading it up. And at the end of the day, you're getting kind of a spreadsheet, usually kind of a CSV that you might load into Power BI, you might load into another tool. Then there's the other category would be tools that can be used for case management or can be used for kind of two-way data management. You can kind of push data to the mobile devices, and you can bring data up from the mobile devices. And three tools that we really like on this front are TerraWorks, Resco, and Comcare. TerraWorks and Resco both, well, TerraWorks is native to Salesforce, so you can build your forms in Salesforce, push them out to mobile data collection users who then collect data, and that data comes up into Salesforce, and you can map it to any objects. And Impact then has functionality for being able to aggregate data from any objects on Salesforce. And so, that use case, we can run a demo for you tomorrow if you want to see that use case, demonstrated. It works. Resco as a form building, for form building, I think has some advantages over TerraWorks. It's also a little bit pricier, and it's not native to Salesforce, but it does have a robust Salesforce integration. So that's a tool that's worth looking at. And then Comcare is a very widely used tool. It doesn't have a native Salesforce integration, but we have integrated it to Salesforce a few times using the open function platform to help set up and manage that integration. So that's another option worth considering. Tools that are just one-way kind of mobile data collection tools. The thing on our roadmap that we're just really doing very early R&D on and would love input on is what we're calling data ingestion. So the thinking here is basically being able to upload a CSV into AMP Impact and be able to set that CSV as the data source for an aggregated indicator instead of a Salesforce object being the data source for an aggregated indicator. You would then need to map, obviously, the CSV columns to the indicator structure. So how do we know the reporting period? How do we know the geographic area? How do we determine the disaggregation values if it's disaggregated in some way? But then it would be able to automatically aggregate just like it can auto aggregate from other Salesforce data. So this is it's a feature that's a bit more medium to long term. If we hear from you all that this is that's a game changer, that's a high priority, I think that'll influence us in terms of how we prioritize it. It is something that, similar to the disaggregation bit, the foundational work, right? The sort of foundation is there to provide this. It's really building the front end, kind of advancing the front end to be able to handle this sort of use case for data ingestion. And then we've also discussed, if you could do it with CSV, that's awesome. But what if you just had, what if it could work with any kind of JSON data source, where you could parse any data source from JSON, and therefore, if you had an online database that you were continuously loading data up to, it could pull in data from that and auto aggregate from that. That'll be more sophisticated, more complex to build, but it's a related use case that we're considering. So Gabby, feel free to chime in here on kind of how we do R&D and kind of how we think about these things. I'm don't want to over promise here, but it is something we're doing kind of early design work on, right?
Yeah, I mean, we are still also finessing our own research methodologies at the moment. But if you have any interest in this feature, it is something that we would really love to connect with you on. So you can, again, reach out to your Vera contact if you are interested in contributing to shaping out the feature, sharing your requirements, letting us know exactly what you would expect to see in something like this. That's something that we are always really eager to hear from you directly on, so that we can have those in consideration as we are doing the more in detail design work. But yeah, we're quite early in the process still, looking at general use cases. How is this being done? How would people like it to be done? So again, please do reach out. We're really happy to talk to you about what you would like to see in it.
Cool. And Shivani had asked about impact stories and any limitations associated with that. We've really built V1 of impact stories to be quite simple, really native to Salesforce. So it can handle, there'll be obviously a field character limit for the length of the story, although you could extend that by just creating another rich text field on the object if you wanted to sort of manage more, or you could create multiple story records, kind of part 1, part 2. But those limits are in the tens of thousands of characters. So it's, I don't think we haven't seen use cases yet where people are running into or having a problem with that as a limitation. In terms of, we have some ideas longer term for impact stories. And this would be the kind of thing that we'd love to dig into in an AMP summit or one-on-one if you guys have thoughts on where that feature goes. One user story for impact stories that we've heard and not yet addressed is wanting the ability to publish a story to the web from AMP Impact, and that's something, again, we've done a bit of R&D on, and we're confident that we'll be able to do that. It's just a matter of having the time to develop that functionality and test it and release it. So that's another thing that's sort of medium term on the roadmap, is publishing impact stories to the web. But because it's built so natively to Salesforce, you can further extend stories however you might want to, right? So if you wanted to, let's say you wanted to tag stories in a particular way that AMP Impact didn't let you do out of the box, you could just build additional relationships from stories to opportunities, or a junction object between stories and accounts to connect the partners that are relevant for a story. So yeah, it's quite extendable functionality, but also quite simple functionality in its first iteration.
Just a follow-up question, Zach, to that. So are clients also using audios and videos as impact stories, or we're just talking of narratives?
Yeah, so you could store a link to an audio file. You could store, Gabby, can we embed videos in rich text, or would you tend to embed like a link to YouTube in the rich text,
Usually it's a link, but yeah, let me just double check on that and follow up with you, Shivani.
Okay.
This is again going to be a Salesforce limitation.
You can also obviously attach a file to the record, and that might be that if let's say a grantee didn't want to publish a video to the web, but they just wanted to share it privately with you guys, they could attach that as a file to the impact story or to the reporting period record, and that would be another way of passing kind of sharing multimedia connected to a story.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. And Naomi, this is impact stories, a specific feature in AMP Impact. Naomi's question was if this is a different app. It's a feature that we launched earlier this year in AMP Impact to extend AMP Impact's functionality for handling non-structured impact data, or less structured impact data, more qualitative impact data, in addition to the qualitative indicator functionality that AMP Impact has, and the narratives, assessments, submissions functionality that AMP Impact has. So sort of another flavor of qualitative impact reporting. Cool. Yeah, if you want to play with it, you can get AMP installed in your sandbox on that link that Katrina sent before. There in the installation instructions, you'll find links to sandbox and to production. If you want to install into a sandbox. Also, if you have AMP installed already, you may need to upgrade. But Gemini, the Gemini release has the stories functionality available where you could go test it out, and just reach out to your contact at Vera if you need a hand in doing that. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Really good discussion. Great to see a really good turnout for another release webinar. And big thanks to the product team and all the great work that went into the Gemini release. We're excited for 2022 and all the innovation to come, and excited to keep listening to you guys and hearing from you guys. What's going well, what we can be doing better, and how we can be strengthening the product together in the years to come. So stay tuned, keep the input coming, and thanks again for everybody's time today. We'll see you in the new year. Hope everybody has a wonderful holiday break in the meantime. And if we can be helpful in any way, don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks, everybody.